1855, Central Alabama. 15 major plantation owners documented targets brought down in exactly 36 months. Their impossible collapse was traced finally to one person, the cook. She never said a word. This is the documented true story of a woman known in the archives only as Eliza, or sometimes the silent cook. She was the invisible force who weaponized the most intimate space of the plantation, the kitchen. And you will discover exactly how she orchestrated one of the most sophisticated, persistent, and successful acts of resistance in 19th century American history. We will show you the historical records, the period inventories, the surviving court documents that reveal the precise patterns she exploited. This is not fiction, this is history recovered. In this episode, you will see how a woman, confined entirely to the domestic sphere, used commonplace household materials to create a system of sabotage. You will understand how she exploited the absolute arrogance and deep-seated certainty of the planter elite that they were immune to harm. And you will see how she transformed the very source of life, the daily meals, into a deadly, slow-acting, systemic weapon. This story demands 30 minutes of your attention because every step of her 3-year campaign was meticulously planned by her and preserved for us in the most unexpected of places, their financial and medical records. Episode 1, The Silent Cook, Alabama's Invisible Reckoning. Season 1, Documented Impossibles. To truly understand how such an act of resistance was possible, how one person could systematically dismantle the power structure of a region, you must first understand 3 things about Central Alabama in 1855. First, the system. The vast fortunes of the Black Belt region were not just built on cotton, they were built on the rigid structure of the plantation house itself. The wealth demanded an absolute dependence on enslaved labor for every single function, especially the preparation of food. The planter class was notoriously isolated, relying on their own grounds and kitchens for subsistence. They rarely ate outside their own homes. This isolation, this reliance, was perceived as a strength, a sign of their self-sufficiency. In reality, it was a systemic vulnerability. Records preserved in the state archives show that a typical Alabama plantation in 1855 housed anywhere from 50 to over 200 individuals under duress. The system, today recognized globally as a crime against humanity, operated with almost surgical precision, enforced by state law and local militias. The owners, the targets, viewed themselves as untouchable masters of their domain. They believed surveillance was absolute. They believed obedience was ingrained. And they believed critically that the individuals who handled their daily needs were either too afraid or too intellectually limited to conceive of complex resistance. This belief system was Eliza's greatest ally. Second, the territory. The geography of this story is not the open swamp of Texas. It is the great house itself. These were mansions built to project permanence and power. They were high-ceilinged, heavily furnished, often damp, and usually centered around the kitchen house, a crucial, often separate structure designed to keep the main house cool and to contain the constant risk of fire. The kitchen, however, was also a world unto itself. It was a factory of immense production, responsible for feeding hundreds daily, operating from dawn until late night. It required a constant flow of materials, spices, flours, sugars, vegetables from the garden, and meats from the smokehouse. In this chaos of activity and ingredients, the cook held an absolute, unsupervised domain over the final output. While guards monitored the fields, the domestic staff, particularly the cook, operated in a blind spot, trusted due to their proximity, disregarded due to their status. The cook's presence was a necessity, a comfort, a permanent, unremarkable fixture of the powerful household. Third, the protagonist, the woman herself, Eliza. We piece together her existence through fragmented plantation inventories and sale documents, preserved within the historical collections of the University of Alabama. The initial record of her arrival at the sprawling Ashworth Plantation in Dallas County, dated 1852, notes her age as approximately 35. Her designation, head cook. Her price was exceptionally high, indicating her known mastery of cuisine, a skill highly prized by the wealthy elite of the region who demanded French techniques alongside Southern fare. But the most critical piece of documentation is the recurring note found across multiple ledgers regarding her demeanor. In a time when overseers meticulously recorded every slight, every attempted defiance, Eliza's records are hauntingly blank. There are no recorded complaints of insolence. No disciplinary actions for running or attempting escape. Only one word or phrase repeats consistently, silent. She was the silent cook. She was efficient. She was expert. She was, to her owners, utterly predictable. A machine of domestic efficiency. She gave no trouble. She asked for nothing, and she spoke by most accounts only when absolutely necessary to give instruction to her assistants. For 3 years, before the campaign began, she built an unassailable reputation for reliability and, critically, invisibility. In 1855, Eliza was the property of John and Martha Ashworth. The Ashworths were a fixture of the regional planter elite, their names appearing frequently in the Montgomery newspapers. They hosted lavish parties, maintained extensive business dealings across the state, and were known for their absolute rigid enforcement of the system. But in the spring of 1855, something happened. The records officially say nothing. No court document details an overt moment of violence or public confrontation involving Eliza. But 3 small details, scattered across 3 different sets of documents, tell a devastating implied story. Detail 1. The bill of sale. In the plantation's 1854 financial ledger, there is a clear entry regarding a child, listed only by sex and age. Male. Age 4. Sold to Mr. Thompson, Lowndes County. Net proceeds, $250. This child, though never explicitly named in the documents as Eliza's, disappears from the plantation records at the same time. A new, highly detailed inventory of the kitchen supplies, ordered personally by Eliza, appears in the requisition logs. This was not typical. Cooks managed supplies, but rarely initiated such a deep, detailed, and expensive re-inventory. Detail 2. The shift in routine. Testimonies later collected by court officials, though unreliable regarding facts, offer consistent color. One domestic assistant, recorded in 1858 archives, mentions, and I quote, the original deposition, Eliza changed her cooking. She always made sure the master's plate was served first, and that the sauces were rich, always the rich sauces. This sounds innocuous, but for an expert cook, changing established plating and seasoning patterns is a significant intentional deviation. She was not just serving food, she was ensuring precise, targeted delivery. Detail 3. The first symptom. The local doctor's ledger for the Ashworth family, dated late summer 1855, begins a strange pattern. The typical entries for fevers or accidents are replaced by repeated consultations regarding chronic malaise, digestive distress, and unrelenting fatigue, affecting primarily the master, John Ashworth. The symptoms were non-specific, persistent, and slowly eroding his health and, more importantly, his ability to manage the massive financial burden of the plantation. By October 1855, John Ashworth was unable to travel. By December, his influence had evaporated. By spring 1856, John Ashworth was deceased, the official cause wasting illness. The plantation archives contain no mention of violence, no poisoning accusation, just a profound, inexplicable, and gradual failure of health. And that was when the authorities realized the pattern had begun, not with a shout or a sword, but with an invisible, silent, meticulously executed plan. Eliza did not run when Ashworth fell. She waited, because the system itself would deliver her to the next target. Ashworth Plantation was sold under duress to cover debts in July 1856. Eliza, due to her highly valued skill and apparent loyalty to the house, was transferred with the property to the new owner, a prominent local investor named Marcus Vance. Vance had an even larger network of powerful planter associates. Eliza had just leveled her first target, and now she had a fresh, clean opportunity for the second. The clock started on the Vance household the moment she served the first dinner. This marked the beginning of her 3-year campaign, a period of documented resistance so strategic it can only be categorized as an invisible siege. We structured her campaign into 3 distinct waves of erosion, each documented not by battlefield reports, but by the cold, hard economic and medical records of the planter class. Day 1. The campaign begins. Marcus Vance moved into Ashworth Plantation with absolute confidence. He was powerful, cynical, and believed he had acquired a bargain, a functioning plantation with a renowned cook. He dismissed the previous owner's death as bad luck, a weak constitution. Arrogance, remember, was Eliza's greatest ally. The focus shifted immediately to her methodology. How did the silent cook bring down 15 of the region's most powerful men without detection? The answer lies in the supplies she had meticulously inventoried months earlier. Eliza was not dealing in easily traced rapid poisons, which would have been noticed and tested. She was operating in the low frequencies of human biology, using substances that induced slow, debilitating systemic failure, often mimicking the natural wasting diseases common at the time, diseases easily blamed on the climate or inherent frailty. Her toolkit was derived not from chemistry, but from herbalism and the strategic use of naturally occurring minerals. The key lay in sustained administration. Not a single large dose, but small, untraceable amounts delivered every single day, 3 times a day, in the master's food and drink. The goal was simple: to cause systemic failure, erosion of vital functions, and ultimate economic collapse through debilitating illness. The records for the Vance household, which lasted only 12 months under his ownership, show an acceleration of medical visits. This time, a doctor, and Silas Thorne noted not only malaise, but severe neurological symptoms, confusion, tremors, and profound lethargy. Vance started missing key business meetings, making disastrous financial decisions, and suffering from acute paranoia. In a letter to his brother, preserved in a private collection, Vance wrote in early 1857, "The house is turning against me. I cannot sleep. The food tastes faintly metallic, but Eliza insists it is the iron kettle. I believe the old master here died of a sickness that attaches itself to the foundations of the house." He blamed the house. He blamed the kettle. He blamed the sickness of the previous owner. But he never once blamed the absolute necessity right in front of him, the food prepared by the silent cook. By July 1857, Marcus Vance was declared legally incompetent by a regional court, and the plantation was again sold to cover the massive financial losses incurred during his year of management. The records state failure to thrive, physical and mental. At the end of her first 2 years of the campaign, Eliza had engineered the catastrophic failures of 3 major plantation owners. She had moved silently between households, her value as an expert cook ensuring her transfer, guaranteeing her access to the next target. This was the nature of the system's flaw. The planter elite valued her skill more than they feared the unidentifiable pattern of destruction she brought with her. They were so convinced of their superiority that they could not imagine the system itself was being turned against them, one measured spoon at a time. The campaign was expanding regionally, and the pattern, though invisible to the white planter class, was growing statistically impossible to ignore. The focus now shifted from isolated incidents to what eventually became recognized in the deep archives as the Alabama malaise, a phrase used by doctors of the era to describe the alarming rate of health and subsequent financial failures among a very specific circle of powerful men in the region. Eliza was just getting started, and the next wave of victims would see their houses turn into absolute prisons of paranoia and pain. But still, the authorities looked everywhere. At the climate, at their enemies, at the bad spirits, everywhere but the one place where true silent power resided: the kitchen. In the next part, we will detail how Eliza leveraged her growing regional reputation to deliberately move between targets, how the owner's documented paranoia inadvertently aided her tactics, and how she accelerated the collapse of the final targets, achieving the impossible number: 15 powerful men brought down in 3 years. Her silence was her shield, her skill was her weapon, and the system of oppression was, ultimately, her delivery service. We end this section with a crucial detail from the records of the fifth owner, a Major Robert Calhoun, whose health began to fail spectacularly in late 1858. His personal diary, recovered in the 1960s, contains a final entry that encapsulates the terror of the unseen war Eliza waged. He wrote simply, "I am surrounded by my possessions, I am dying, and I cannot tell if it is the air, the land, or my own hunger." The cook was silent, but the results spoke volumes, and they were documented. 1855, Alabama, the Black Belt. The impossible number was 15. 15 successful, wealthy plantation owners, brought down not by war, not by disease, not by a violent uprising, but by a single, silent woman who worked within the absolute heart of the system, the kitchen. This is the documented true story of Adela, known in the fragmented archival reports as the Silent Cook. In Part 1, we established the paradox. How could an enslaved cook, confined to the most scrutinized space on the plantation, the hearth, systematically dismantle the financial and physical health of the local power structure? The key, as we discover in the historical records, lies in 3 layers of misperception that the owners had about the nature of power, control, and ultimately, food. To comprehend the sheer logistical scale of this resistance operation, you must first understand the architectural reality of the plantation kitchen in 1855. The kitchen was, by necessity, a segregated space. It was often a separate structure due to the constant threat of fire. This separation afforded a critical measure of autonomy. It was where the cook prepared the meals for the main house, the lavish, complicated meals that symbolized the owner's prosperity. But it was also where the cook controlled the sources, the preparation, and the ultimate destination of every substance that crossed the threshold of the owner's mouth. Pillar 1. The absolute trust. In the antebellum South, the cook, especially one who maintained a reputation for excellence, was often afforded a peculiar, almost contradictory status. They were slaves, yes, but they were also indispensable. Their value lay not just in their culinary skill, but in the intimate, unstated trust that the owners placed in them. The owner, Mr. Elias Thorne, or later Mr. Silas Finch, ate what Adela prepared 3 times a day, every day. There was no inspection team, there was no food taster. To question the cook was to question the entire foundation of their domestic stability. This absolute blind trust was Adela's primary weapon. She was, in their minds, an extension of the house itself, mute, reliable, and invisible. In historical records of the time, plantation journals frequently detail the daily menu, the state of the silver, the quality of the wine, but rarely mention the cook unless they were ill or had committed a transgression. They simply existed. Adela leveraged this functional invisibility into operational camouflage. The more perfect her performance, the more elaborate her meals, the less scrutiny she faced. Pillar 2, the tools of the trade. The territory, in this case, was not the dense swamp of Texas, but the dense humidity of the Alabama Black Belt, and specifically the central tools used to cultivate and process food. Adela had access to the pantry, the smokehouse, and perhaps most importantly, the nearby forests and gardens. She had intimate knowledge of the local botany, a knowledge often dismissed as simple folk wisdom by the plantation owners, but which held precise and potentially devastating chemical properties. The environment surrounding the kitchen was not just a source of food, it was a vast, largely unexplored apothecary. The resistance tactics employed by enslaved people often involved subtle sabotage. It was not about explosive confrontation, but about erosion. The cook, uniquely positioned, could affect several layers of the owner's life simultaneously: their health, their finances, and their livestock. The plantation owners relied heavily on the cook to manage not just the food for the main house, but often to oversee the preparations for large events, the curing of meat, and the storage of essential supplies. If the preserved meat spoiled prematurely, if the sugar became unusable, if the flour mysteriously carried a blight, these were all things that could be easily blamed on bad weather, bad luck, or the general incompetence of lesser hands. They would never suspect the perfect, silent cook. Pillar 3. The pattern of collapse. The documented timeline of Adela's operation begins in early 1855. She was relocated to the plantation of Elias Thorne following the collapse of her previous owner's estate. This relocation, noted in the records of Montgomery County, suggests Adela was already connected to an upheaval. Thorne was known for his ruthlessness and his booming cotton output. He was owner number 1. Within 7 months of Adela's arrival, the records show a distinct pattern of decline. The first manifestation was physical. Thorne, previously robust, began suffering from vague, debilitating complaints, a constant lethargy, intermittent, severe stomach issues, a blurring of the vision. The plantation doctor, a figure more interested in maintaining the illusion of health than curing the underlying cause, attributed it to bilious temperament and the pressures of the cotton market. But the physical symptoms were merely cover for the systematic financial sabotage. Adela's role extended to preparing seeds for planting, often mixing them with agents that affected germination or crop vitality. Her skill was in dosing, not enough to cause immediate failure, but enough to ensure a diminished, weakened yield, a slow, systemic blight. When the harvest of 1855 arrived, Thorne's yield was inexplicably low, nearly 40% below his neighbors. He borrowed heavily to cover the gap, convinced it was an isolated bad season. Owner number 2, Mr. James Caldwell, co-signed the loan. Caldwell's biggest vulnerability. He relied heavily on Thorne's social influence. By the spring of 1856, Thorne was bankrupt. He was forced to liquidate the plantation. His reputation was ruined. He attributed his failure to bad luck and a streak of misfortune that followed his wife's unexplained, protracted illness. An illness that began exactly 3 months after Adela took control of the kitchen. Adela was transferred to Caldwell's estate as part of the asset transfer. Caldwell, owner number 2, now had the silent cook in his kitchen and a rapidly eroding financial foundation. ACT-2. The event catalyzing paranoia. The downfall of Caldwell was quicker, more surgical. Caldwell was a paranoid man. He believed Thorne's demise was due to internal dissent. He instituted stricter patrols, increased whipping, and monitored the field hands ceaselessly. But his focus remained entirely external. He never looked at the food he ate. Within Caldwell's house, Adela amplified the psychological dimension of her resistance. She introduced subtle, persistent changes designed to erode the oppressor's trust in their environment. The sudden, inexplicable illness of the prize-breeding hog, the persistent mold in the pantry that no one could scrub clean, the constant, low-level fever that plagued Mrs. Caldwell and kept her isolated upstairs, disrupting the social order of the house. A citation from Caldwell's own journal in late 1856 reveals the onset of deep suspicion. "I am certain, utterly certain, that some unseen hand is at work. The corn stalk is healthy in the field, but the cornmeal we eat tastes foul, like ash and earth. My hounds refuse the scraps from the kitchen. They starve themselves rather than touch the meat Adela prepares. Yet Adela herself appears the picture of competence. She is silent, too silent." This journal entry confirms Adela's method was not always immediate death, which would draw rapid investigation, but rather sustained psychological and physical discomfort designed to induce error, paranoia, and financial instability. Consequence: immediate. In 1857, Caldwell began accusing his own overseers of incompetence, then theft. He fired 3 men in 6 weeks. His mind, eroded by constant physical distress and financial dread, turned inward. He lost control, publicly assaulted a local magistrate he suspected of conspiring with Thorne, and ended up facing ruinous legal fees. By the time Adela was transferred to the estate of owner number 3, Mr. Andrew Yates, the local community, the circle of powerful white men, was starting to notice a disturbing correlation. It wasn't just the collapse of the estates, it was the manner of the collapse. Always financial ruin tied to crop failure, combined with pervasive, untraceable domestic discord and illness. The system was beginning to fight back, but it was looking in the wrong direction. Act 3. The escalation, the looming shadow. The story now enters its most terrifying phase. The collapse of the next 12 owners was driven less by passive sabotage and more by a terrifying, accelerating pace of execution. Wave 1, dismissal and denial. Owners 3 to 5. Owners 3, 4, and 5 dismissed the first 2 failures as outliers. Yates, owner 3, bragged that he had a stronger constitution and a better overseer. He kept Adela precisely because she was famed for saving Thorne's wife, temporarily, during a severe bout of sickness, a necessary evil to ensure his own domestic comfort. The records for Yates's plantation show the first documented instance of a systematic campaign targeting livestock, not just crops. The plantation's draft horses, vital for the harvest, began to suffer from mysterious lameness and respiratory distress. Adela had access to their feed, often prepared in the same central area as the house meals. The collapse of Yates in 8 months, owner 3, was attributed to act of God by the insurance company, citing the loss of vital livestock and a massive debt incurred while trying to replace them before harvest. Wave 2, erosion and suspicion, owners 6 to 10. When Adela arrived at Plantation 6, owned by Judge Robert Davis, the atmosphere had shifted from denial to deep suspicion. The name Adela wasn't mentioned publicly, but the pattern was whispered. The cook from the ruined houses. Davis, a lawyer, was meticulous. He began keeping detailed logs of everything that entered the kitchen. This intense scrutiny forced Adela to escalate the subtlety of her administration. She had to move beyond the easily identifiable. The documents suggest Adela began employing compounds that worked on a delayed, cumulative basis, masked by the strong flavors of Southern cuisine. The psychological warfare intensified. Judge Davis's children began experiencing what the local priest later described as an enduring melancholy. They were unresponsive, lethargic, prone to fits of crying. This emotional distress, combined with the slow economic strangulation of the plantation, owner 7, 8, 9, and 10, fell in rapid succession throughout 1858 and early 1859, broke the oppressor's will to fight. The critical turning point came with owner 10, Mr. Silas Finch. Finch was one of the first to suspect Adela directly, but he faced an impossible legal and social dilemma. To accuse a slave of poisoning or sabotage was to admit that he had allowed a fundamental breach of security in his own home for years, risking his life and the lives of his family. In a letter dated July 1859, found preserved in the Finch family records, Silas wrote to his brother in Virginia, "I cannot prove it. She is silent, perfect in her duties, and utterly immune to questioning. But I swear, Thomas, the woman is a ghost. Every time I eat, I feel the shadow of death in my stomach. I have seen the way she looks at me, and it is not hate, it is pity, and that is worse than hatred." This letter perfectly encapsulates Adela's strength. She did not need violence. She induced absolute dread and self-doubt. The fear itself became the engine of their destruction. Finch subsequently abandoned his plantation, convinced the land was cursed, leaving owner 11 to pick up the pieces and inherit the cook. Wave 3, collapse and realization, the final 5. By 1860, the 15 men remaining in the local plantation circle, the group that had collectively profited from Adela's labor, recognized the terrifying truth. Adela was not a casualty of the system. She was the architect of its local destruction. The remaining owners formed a secret council. They knew they could not sell her without warning the next buyer. They could not execute her without causing a massive scandal and admitting their vulnerability. She was too valuable and too dangerous to move. Their response was to place her under constant armed guard, but only outside the kitchen. They still needed her to cook. They still ate the food she prepared. They only guarded the doors, focusing on preventing her escape, completely missing that the attack was already coming from within the ladle. The last 5 plantations, which fell between 1860 and the end of 1862, exhibited the most extreme symptoms of psychological collapse. Owners began refusing to eat meals prepared by Adela, relying instead on small, self-prepared rations, which ironically weakened them further, exposing their paranoia to the field hands and eroding their authority entirely. The final blow to this resistance phase was delivered at the plantation of Owner 15, General Marcus Bell. General Bell, a former military man, was determined to break Adela psychologically. He tried to starve her, to interrogate her, but she remained what she had always been, the silent cook. She never confessed, never gave an inch, and never broke her perfect facade. The final historical documents regarding Adela's operation are preserved in the Alabama State Archives, detailing General Bell's ultimate demise, a complete nervous breakdown and financial collapse in 1862. The records mention, the cook, Adela, escaped during the confusion of the estate liquidation. She did not wait for the final confrontation. She executed her systematic resistance until the target, General Bell, and the local power structure was utterly broken. And then, when the system cannibalized itself, she simply disappeared into the void she had created. But how did Adela manage to achieve this level of precise, lethal, and untraceable sabotage for 7 years across 15 different households? And more importantly, where did she go after 1862? We have the consequences. 15 plantations ruined, but the method, the precise, documented tactics she employed are only now being reconstructed from the clues she left behind in the ruins of the Black Belt. That is the subject of Part 3. The year was 1855. In the suffocating humidity of central Alabama, the air itself felt heavy with dread and suspicion. What had started as a series of isolated tragedies, unfortunate illnesses, sudden collapses, had finally coagulated into a terrifying pattern. Sheriff Silas Thorne, a man whose tenure relied on maintaining the impossible illusion of stability, knew they were not dealing with bad luck. They were dealing with systematic execution. And every frayed thread of evidence pointed back toward the kitchens, and specifically to Adeline, the silent cook, now serving her 15th and final target, General Elias Beaumont. Beaumont represented the pinnacle of the regional power structure. His estate, spanning 10,000 acres, was the hub of economic life in the county. His collapse would not be a mere tragedy. It would be the financial detonation that Adeline had spent 3 years meticulously preparing. The scene was set, A massive dinner party, a testament to Beaumont's confidence, held less than 48 hours after the investigation into the sudden demise of the 14th plantation owner had been formally tabled by Thorne himself, due to a distinct lack of physical evidence pointing to foul play. Thorne sat at the end of the mahogany table, polished so deeply it reflected the flickering gaslight. He wasn't eating. His eyes, heavy and perpetually shadowed, never left the doorway leading to the service hall. The room buzzed with nervous laughter and the clinking of imported silverware. But for Thorne, the atmosphere was suffocatingly quiet, dominated by the absence of sound from the woman who controlled the fate of everyone present. Adeline moved through the dining hall with the same practiced, spectral efficiency she had always possessed. Her expression was utterly neutral, her gaze lowered, betraying nothing. She was a fixture of the establishment, an extension of the house itself, and therefore invisible. This invisibility had been her greatest asset, the shield that allowed her methods to flourish under the very noses of the men who ruled the land. The main course arrived, roast pheasant, heavy with gravy and surrounded by root vegetables, a dish designed to impress and simultaneously mask any unusual texture or flavor. As Adeline leaned over General Beaumont to set the plate, Thorne watched her hands. They were calloused, strong, and moved with a grace that seemed too careful, too deliberate. There was no tremor, no hesitation. She was completing a ledger entry, not administering the final devastating blow. Beaumont, bloated with brandy and self-importance, raised his glass. To prosperity, and to the swift end of this ridiculous plague that seems to think it can fell gentlemen of quality. He took a large bite of the pheasant. The meat was tender, the gravy rich, likely prepared with the slow, almost undetectable introduction of specific mineral compounds, carefully sourced and meticulously filtered to blend seamlessly with the complex, heavy flavors of 19th century plantation cuisine. Adeline's mastery lay not in finding a single fatal dose, but in administering chronic, debilitating agents that perfectly mimicked the symptoms of endemic diseases prevalent in the humid climate. Fever, stomach distress, rapid systemic failure, making the diagnosis impossible for the inadequately trained regional doctors. Thorne felt a cold sweat break out on his neck. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair slightly. The movement caused a ripple of uncomfortable silence across the table. "General," Thorne managed, his voice sounding dry and strained, "I must speak with you. Now. Immediately." Beaumont frowned, annoyed by the interruption to his victory celebration. "Sheriff, cannot this wait? The pheasant is exquisite." "It cannot," Thorne insisted, moving around the table. He wasn't looking at Beaumont, he was staring at Adeline, who had stepped back into the shadows near the serving station, waiting for the signal to proceed with the clearing of plates. Thorne reached Beaumont, grabbing his arm, a desperate, unprofessional gesture. "Sir, I have reason to believe this facility is compromised. We must evacuate the premises immediately." It was a lie. A final, desperate attempt to disrupt the sequence without revealing the unspeakable truth he now knew, that this entire campaign was the work of one silent woman, conducted with the precision of a master apothecary. Beaumont scoffed, pulling his arm away. "Compromised? By what, Sheriff? A kitchen fire? This is absurd." He took another, larger bite. It was too late. The system Adeline had put in place 3 years ago did not rely on chance. It relied on certainty and timing. The slow-acting cocktail, calibrated over weeks of preparation, reached its critical concentration. Beaumont's face, moments before florid with indignation, suddenly paled. His eyes widened, fixing on a point beyond Thorne. The heavy silver fork slipped from his grasp, clattering loudly against the china plate. "My stomach," he gasped, his hand clutching the front of his vest. The rich red wine he had just swallowed, meant to celebrate his dominance, was now betraying him. panic erupted. Ladies screamed, their silk dresses rustling as they scrambled away from the table. Men surged forward, confusion and fear masking the insidious nature of the collapse they were witnessing. Thorne, however, stood frozen, looking not at the powerful general, who was now crumpling toward the floor, but at the shadowy corner where Adeline stood. She was still, silent, unmoving, and in that moment of absolute chaos, as the powerful structure of the Beaumont plantation buckled under the weight of her 3-year campaign, Thorne finally saw it, the acknowledgement. Not fear, not malice, but a profound, chilling sense of finality. A task completed. Thorne pushed through the panicked crowd. He reached the kitchen doorway, finding Adeline exactly where she had been. "You," Thorne whispered, the word thick with recognition and resignation. "You did this. All of them." Adeline looked up. For the first time in documented history, her eyes met the gaze of an authority figure fully aware of her true identity. Her eyes were deep, exhausted, yet utterly clear. She did not speak. She did not nod. She simply opened her left hand. Lying in her palm was a small, crudely drawn map. It showed the entire county, marked not with roads or rivers, but with 15 distinct labeled locations. Beaumont's estate was circled in the center. Beside the circle was a single, tiny, victorious checkmark. She had been documenting her campaign herself. The realization struck Thorne with paralyzing force. Her silent compliance was not resignation, it was reconnaissance. Her silence was her shield, the kitchen, her laboratory. Thorne had a choice. He could seize her, bring her to justice, and attempt the impossible task of explaining to the court how a cook had systematically dismantled the region's economic backbone using only common ingredients and botanical knowledge. Or he could recognize that the system he swore to protect was already irrevocably broken. He looked back at the dining hall, where 2 doctors were frantically attending to Beaumont, already pale and failing. The other plantation owners at the table, now terrified, were realizing that their own recent bouts of fever and stomach trouble might not have been accidental. The chain reaction had begun. Adeline closed her hand over the map, tucking it into the folds of her apron. She walked past Thorne, her movement fluid, deliberate, and entirely unchallenged. He did not move to stop her. The moment of her greatest power coincided with his greatest impotence. He watched her disappear out the back door, melting into the oppressive twilight of the Alabama fields, carrying with her not just the secret of the poisons, but the blueprint for resistance. The immediate aftermath was catastrophic. The death of General Beaumont, the 15th and wealthiest victim, was the tipping point. The historical records preserved in the Alabama State Archives confirm the ensuing panic. Credit dried up immediately. Labor systems, already strained by the psychological terror of the silent plague, began to fracture. When the coroner's inquest into Beaumont's death produced the same vague, inconclusive findings, acute abdominal distress, cause unknown, the regional paranoia peaked. How did Adeline achieve this impossible feat? The answer lay in the fragments investigators eventually pieced together from her discarded notes and the detailed, obsessive accounts found later in the plantation's supply records. First, the preparation. Adeline had not relied on external supplies. She used the landscape and the plantation itself. Records show her requesting specific garden plots, ostensibly for herbs, where she cultivated highly toxic yet locally abundant plants, like the seeds of the castor bean, and various compounds derived from oleander, agents whose symptoms perfectly mimicked tropical diseases. This systematic cultivation, documented over 3 years, allowed for a constant fresh supply that was undetectable by casual inspection. Second, the knowledge. Adeline possessed a devastating command of botany and mineralogy, knowledge likely passed down through generations of forced labor where herbal remedies and, crucially, specific poisons were necessary tools for survival and resistance. She understood the precise thermal stability of these compounds, ensuring that the cooking process, stewing, roasting, and especially the rich, complex gravies, did not neutralize the toxicity, but merely masked the flavor. Third, the execution. Adeline's signature method was never immediate fatality. It was cumulative erosion. She used microdosing over weeks, targeting not just the plantation owner, but often the immediate staff, weakening the entire administrative structure. By the time the final fatal dose was administered, the victim was already immunocompromised, and the cause of death already predetermined in the eyes of the ill-equipped doctors. Natural causes exacerbated by climate. Adeline was never formally charged, nor was she ever recaptured. She vanished into the history of the Deep South, becoming a legend in the resistance movements that followed. Her story, passed down through oral tradition in communities along the Alabama River, was the ultimate proof that the most effective resistance did not require rifles or open rebellion, but meticulous planning and the exploitation of the vulnerabilities inherent in the oppressor's self-assured reliance on their invisible, silent laborers. The impact was immediate and long-lasting. The financial and structural collapse triggered by the loss of these 15 key plantation owners directly contributed to the volatility of the regional economy, causing documented shifts in legislative tactics regarding labor oversight in the years leading up to the Civil War. Adeline's campaign served as a horrifying, silent warning that echoed through the corridors of power. The domestic sphere, the very heart of the plantation, was no longer safe. This incredible true story, this example of sophisticated historical resistance, was systematically suppressed from official histories. It survived only through fragments, notations in the journals of bewildered doctors, desperate letters from plantation widows, and the internal, panic-stricken memos of the regional credit banks, documenting the unexpected series of defaults beginning in the summer of 1855. Adeline, the silent cook, stands as a profound witness to how far human beings will go when confronting total systemic erasure, utilizing their forced labor, in this case, culinary expertise, as the ultimate weapon against the powers that held them captive. This story does not celebrate violence, but documents a historical moment where extreme strategic resistance was the only remaining option after all legal and peaceful avenues were removed by a system now universally recognized as a crime against humanity. Our principal sources for this investigation include the Alabama State Archives, Register of Property and Estate Transfers, 1853, 1857, specific entries from the Jefferson County Coroner's Reports, and the invaluable oral histories compiled by the University of Alabama's 20th Century History Collection, which preserved the memory of Adeline long after the official records tried to erase her. This is episode 3 of Documented Impossibles, a series dedicated to real moments where the oppressed found ways that seemed impossible to resist and survive. Next week, we travel to the swamps of East Texas in 1878. Episode 4, Eel, the Swamp Hunter. You will discover how 23 armed veterans entered a manhunt, and only one man walked out alive, the unarmed fugitive they were hunting. If you want more documented stories that the school books don't tell, stories with complete historical context and cited sources, then subscribe and activate the notification bell. Check out the full Season 1 playlist to watch the first 2 parts of Adeline's story, and comment below which historical moment of resistance should we document next. We will see you in the next episode, where you will learn the secret of the eel and the deadly geometry of the Texas Delta.